The reason you can't remember your childhood isn't because nothing happened, it's because too much did, and your brain had to choose what to keep and what to let go, without asking you first. You're not damaged, your mind isn't failing you. This is protection, not loss. Most people walk around with this low-level guilt about their childhood, like they should remember more, like the fact that entire years are just blank means something is wrong with them. You've probably felt it. That moment when someone asks what was your childhood like and you freeze, because you genuinely don't know. You have maybe a handful of scenes, some birthday, a vacation, a room you lived in, but the rest is just this vague emotional fog, and when you try to explain it, you sound uncertain, detached, like you're describing someone else's life. Here's what most people don't realize. Childhood amnesia isn't about having a bad memory. It's about having a developing brain that was never designed to archive everything. Your brain was too busy learning language, learning to walk, learning what faces mean and how to be a person. It didn't have the bandwidth to also create a documentary of your life. But here's the part that actually matters. The part we're going to unpack together. The specific things you forgot and the specific things you kept have been shaping your entire emotional life ever since. And most people never realize it. So let me ask you something you've probably never said out loud. When you look back at your childhood, do you feel like you're remembering a life you actually lived? Or do you feel like you're assembling a story from evidence? Because there's a difference. One feels like lived experience, the other feels like forensics. And if you're in the second category, if your childhood feels more like a case file than a narrative, something specific has been happening to you ever since. Here's how it starts. When you're very young, maybe 2, 3, 4 years old, you're experiencing the world at full intensity. Everything is enormous. Every emotion is total. Every moment is the only moment. But here's the problem. You don't have the cognitive infrastructure to turn those experiences into memories yet. You don't have a sense of time. You don't have a coherent self-concept. You don't have the language to label what's happening to you. So your brain does something remarkable. It records everything as sensory and emotional data, but it doesn't file it in a way you can retrieve later. The information is there. It's just not indexed. It's like having a library where all the books are thrown in a pile in the basement instead of organized on shelves. The content exists, but you can't find it. And as you get older, your brain essentially says, we're building a new filing system now. Some of this is coming with us, most of it isn't. That's not cruelty, that's triage. But here's what happens next, and this is where it gets personal. The memories your brain chose to bring forward, they weren't chosen randomly. They were chosen based on emotional intensity and survival relevance. Which means the memories you kept are often the ones where something felt wrong, where something was unpredictable, where you had to figure out how to stay safe or loved or okay. And the memories you lost, often those are the ones where you felt fine, secure, unremarkable. Your brain kept the alarms, it discarded the all clears. So when you try to remember your childhood now, what you're actually accessing is a highlight reel of emotional threat and uncertainty. And then you're sitting there as an adult thinking, was it really that bad? Or am I just remembering it wrong? You're not remembering it wrong. You're remembering the only parts your brain thought were important enough to save. 1. You've learned to mistrust your own emotional reactions because you don't know where they came from. Here's something you probably do. You're in a situation. Maybe someone raises their voice slightly, maybe someone cancels plans last minute, maybe you're left waiting for a response, and you feel this surge of emotion, anxiety, hurt, anger, and your first thought is, why am I reacting this way? This doesn't make sense. Because logically, the situation doesn't warrant the intensity of what you're feeling. So you try to talk yourself down. You tell yourself you're overreacting, you try to be rational. But here's what's actually happening. You're having an emotional response to something that happened in your childhood, but you can't remember the original event. So the feeling arrives without context, without explanation. It just is. And because you can't trace it back to a source, you assume it's irrational. You assume you're the problem. This makes you someone who constantly second-guesses your own feelings. Someone who apologizes for emotional responses you can't justify. Someone who's learned to say, I don't know why I'm being like this, because you genuinely don't. But here's the truth. Your feelings aren't irrational. They're just responding to information you can no longer consciously access. You're not overreacting. You're reacting to a pattern your body remembers even though your mind doesn't. 2. You've developed a heightened sensitivity to inconsistency in other people because your early memories are full of gaps you couldn't predict. Let me describe something you might recognize. You're talking to someone, maybe a friend, maybe a partner, and they say something that contradicts what they said last week. It's small, insignificant. Most people wouldn't even notice, but you notice, and it bothers you. Not because you're controlling or nitpicky, but because inconsistency feels dangerous to you in a way you can't quite explain. Here's why. When you were little, you were constantly trying to map the emotional landscape around you, trying to figure out what makes people happy, what makes them angry. How do I know what's coming? But the memories didn't stick, so you never got to build a reliable map. Instead, you learned that people and situations can shift without warning, and you won't necessarily remember the pattern that explains why. So now, as an adult, you're hypervigilant about consistency. You track what people say. You notice when their mood shifts. You're always scanning for the change you might have missed, not because you're paranoid, but because you're compensating for a childhood where the rules kept changing and you couldn't hold on to the evidence. People think you're perceptive, and you are. But what they don't see is that your perception is exhausting, because you're not just noticing, you're trying to protect yourself from surprises you won't see coming. 3. You feel like you became yourself suddenly, like you woke up one day already formed, with no idea how you got there. Here's a strange one. Most people can tell you stories about how they became who they are. I got into music because my dad played guitar. I'm anxious because this thing happened when I was 7. But you can't trace the origins, you just are certain ways. You have preferences and fears and habits that feel intrinsic, but you can't explain where they came from. It's like you were assembled in the dark, and when the lights finally came on, maybe around age 7, maybe later, you were already you, but you don't remember the construction process. This creates this quiet, existential loneliness, because you can't participate in those conversations where people trace their personality back to childhood moments. You don't have the receipts, so you just say, "I've always been like this," and hope no one asks follow-up questions. And over time, this makes you feel like you don't fully understand yourself. Even though you are yourself, you know what you are, you just don't know why. And that gap, that missing origin story, it makes you feel like there's something fundamental about your own existence that you're locked out of. 4. You've become intensely private about your inner life because you learned early that your version of events doesn't match other people's. Here's what happens when you can't remember your childhood clearly. Someone, maybe a parent, maybe a sibling, tells a story about you as a kid, and you listen, and you think, "I don't remember it that way." Or, "Do I? Maybe I'm wrong." So you stay quiet. You don't correct them. You don't offer your version, because your version feels less solid than theirs. And over time, you learn. Other people's memories are more authoritative than your own. This makes you someone who keeps things to yourself. Someone who doesn't share stories from your past because you're not confident they're accurate. Someone who lets other people narrate your history while you sit there feeling like a spectator. But here's what that does to you. It trains you to believe that your inner experience is less real than external consensus. So even now, as an adult, you downplay your own perceptions. You defer to other people's certainty. You assume that if your memory doesn't match someone else's, you must be the one who's confused. And that makes you permeable, easy to gaslight, easy to convince that your reality isn't trustworthy. Not because you're weak, but because you've been operating without a reliable record of your own life for so long that you've learned to trust others more than yourself. 5. You search for your childhood in other people's nostalgia, and it never quite fits. You've done this. I know you have. You've watched a movie set in the era you grew up in, or listened to someone describe their childhood in detail, or scrolled through those "only 90s kids will remember" posts, and you feel this strange mix of recognition and distance. Like, yes, technically you were there, you existed in that time period, but it doesn't feel like your nostalgia. It feels like someone else's childhood that you happen to be alive during. Because here's the thing, nostalgia requires memory. And memory requires emotional continuity. And if you don't have that continuity, you can't access the warm, fuzzy feeling other people get when they think about their past. Instead, you get this hollow ache, this sense of having missed something everyone else got to keep. So you collect other people's memories like artifacts. You listen to their stories with intensity, trying to build a composite picture of what childhood is supposed to feel like. but it never feels like yours. It always feels like research. 6. You've built your identity almost entirely in the present, because the past isn't solid enough to stand on. Here's the adaptation. When you can't anchor yourself in, "I've always been this way," or "this happened, so now I'm like this," you have to build your identity differently. You become someone who defines yourself by what you're doing now, your current values, your current relationships, your current goals, which sounds healthy, right? Living in the present? But here's the shadow side. You have no sense of permanence, because if your identity is only built on the now, what happens when the now changes? You can feel like you're starting over constantly, like you're rebuilding yourself from scratch every few years, like there's no through line, no consistent self that's been there all along. This makes you adaptable, resilient, good at reinvention, but it also makes you unmoored, like you're floating through your own life without a foundation. People see your flexibility as strength, but what they don't see is the loneliness of never feeling like you truly know who you've been all along. Now here's the part that changes everything. What if I told you that the forgetting isn't the problem? What if the problem is that you've been treating your missing memories like a deficit, when they might actually be a door? Listen carefully. You lost those details, but you kept something more important. You kept the emotional truth. You might not remember the specific fight, but you remember what it felt like to need to be small. You might not remember being ignored, but you remember the vigilance of trying to matter. You don't have the scenes, but you have the script. And that script, those core emotional patterns, they're more accurate than any specific memory could be, because they're not one moment. They're the accumulated weight of thousands of moments your brain compressed into a felt sense. You're not missing information. You're carrying compressed wisdom your conscious mind hasn't learned to read yet. And once you understand that, everything shifts. Here's what I need you to hear. You're not less whole because you don't remember. You're not less real because your past is thin. You are someone who had to become yourself without a manual, and you did it anyway. The gaps aren't evidence of damage. They're evidence of transformation so complete that your brain had to clear space for who you were becoming. You don't need to recover everything. You just need to trust that the person you are now, the one listening to this, the one paying attention, is the result of everything that happened, even the parts you can't see. You're not lost. You're not broken. You're not missing pieces. You're exactly as whole as you need to be. And the people who can see that will find you. If this landed somewhere deep, sit with it. Let it settle. And if someone you know is carrying this same quiet weight, send this to them. Sometimes we need permission to stop searching for proof we were real. You were, you are, you will be.